What's going on, guys? Today I just wanted to talk about Last Epoch. Last Epoch has been getting a lot of attention lately, I think because Path of Exile's League is dying down a little bit, so a lot of the bigger streamers are switching around to different games, and a lot of them have turned to Last Epoch. And for myself, Last Epoch is one of those games where I have considered playing it for quite some time, but for whatever reason, I've just haven't pulled the trigger. I think maybe it has something to do with the graphics or like the audio, some of the animations, or just the overall lack of polish of the game. Definitely has that I've seen on streams and videos, and it's just kind of been off-putting to me. But the other day I finally decided to pull the trigger and give the game a shot, and I am really glad that I did. So originally this video was going to be about just like gameplay, which I guess it'll still be mostly about gameplay, but what ended up happening was I just made a giant list of things that I really like about the game, and I'm going to try to go through this list as organized as possible and talk about the things that I really thought were great in Last Epoch. So let's get the nitty-gritty stuff out of the way first. Obviously, the game lacks polish. The models don't look too great. The audio could be a little bit better in some places. The voice acting is, it's there. And the environments could definitely be better. But all that aside, the gameplay itself, like running around with your character, killing enemies, the AI of the enemies actually, all of that is actually surprisingly really good. And playing the characters feels really smooth and fun. Granted, I've only played the rogue so far, and I know that's what everyone's playing right now since the rogue is new to the game. But the bow build, or the bow mastery of that class, is what interested me to begin with. So I guess it could be possible that the other classes don't feel as smooth as the rogue, but from what I've seen on streams and stuff, they look just as fun and smooth, and I honestly wouldn't doubt if they're all equally as good as the rogue is. So with that stuff out of the way, let's just jump into some things that I really do like about the game. So generally just skills. I like the way the skills work. I really enjoy that it's not like Diablo 3 and what Diablo 4 seems like it's going to be, where you have skills that are just on really long cooldowns and end up being some of your strongest abilities, which force players into using them more often than not, and it also pigeonholes them into certain playstyles and specific itemization. And what I mean by that is just items that focus solely on cooldown reduction so you can spam those abilities more often. From what I can tell so far, Last Epoch doesn't really have skills like that where they're on really long cooldowns and your entire ability is just focused around that ability and buffing it in one way or another with your other abilities. But this doesn't mean that the abilities themselves lack synergy. Like, for instance, the build that I'm doing right now is solely based around fire damage, and I have a couple abilities, actually all of my abilities that do damage do a form of fire damage, but they also synergize really well together. I have one ability called Cinder Strike that just makes me do overall increased fire damage the more times I shoot it. And at the same time, it also lowers the enemy's resistance based on how many stacks of this buff that I have. Which means that if I'm attacking with this ability and then I switch to another ability like my detonating arrow, then that also benefits from however many stacks I have currently of the buff from Cinder Strike. And on top of that, I also have an ability called Acid Flask. But with Acid Flask, you can actually specialize it to do fire damage, and on top of that you can use it to lower enemy resistances. So I have these three different offensive abilities that synergize really well together, and I can use them in a way that feels really good to me. And if you haven't noticed while I've been explaining these abilities to you guys, every single ability you have in the game has its own unique skill tree. This is like a big selling point for Last Epoch. This is their system that's unique to them. And honestly, I think this is the ideal system. I'm not a huge fan of the Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 route where you have a bunch of unique items that change the way your abilities work, because that means that those uniques become very specific and niche to certain builds. I much rather prefer the Last Epoch approach where you can specify how the ability works yourself through skill customization, and then you can use unique items to enhance the build that you already created yourself. I think this gives players a lot more freedom in the way that they play their characters. And while we're on the topic of skills, I want to talk about the skill points and how they feel. Putting the points into your skills feels very meaningful. I sometimes find myself sitting there for 10 or 15 minutes just looking at my skill point that I'm going to spend on one skill. Earlier on, this isn't that big of a deal, but later on in the game, as you get to higher levels and you start to slowly get these points, each one starts to feel more and more impactful. But another great thing here is that you're not stuck into using that skill forever. You're able to respec and try out new skills with just a minor drawback, where you basically have to re-level that skill again, but it actually doesn't take that long. So if I was to compare this to like Path of Exile or something, it would probably be like going from a level 20 gem to like a level 15 gem. I just like that they offer a way for you to respec your character so you don't have to spend a bunch of time re-rolling, but at the same time, it's also punishing, so it makes you think about the decisions you're going to make. So as far as like general complexity, Last Epoch falls right in the middle of the road between Diablo 3 and Path of Exile. So we all know that Path of Exile is known for just being really complex, and I think that they've actually gotten to a point in their game where they've crossed the line of complexity and fun. It's gotten to the point to where it's not fun anymore and it's just too complex. There are certain interactions in Path of Exile that you would have no idea existed until they just like outright killed your character or like ruined a build for you that you spent the last 30 hours working on. And you have to spend the majority of your playtime on other websites, whether it's through trading or learning about different items or interactions between items or just mechanics in general. There are even players that have 20,000 plus hours in Path of Exile that have trouble explaining and understanding certain mechanics.
No. That's conversion.
Okay.
That's something else. That's like another segment. There's a lot of different things. PoE is complicated.
Yeah.
God damn it.
And if that's the case, then your game has a fundamental problem in the way that they present their idea of complexity. And then you have Diablo 3, which has no complexity whatsoever. You know, you just stack things like crit chance, crit damage, and CDR in a lot of your builds, and, you know, just put a set on, and that's your character in Diablo 3. A lot of what makes Last Epoch fall into this middle category is their skill system and their itemization. And not only the itemization, but also the crafting that comes along with it. So one downside that I think that, and this is probably just a personal opinion, but I think one downside to Last Epoch is there seems to be a lack of unique items. There just aren't that many. And for some people, this could be a good or a bad thing, because what this primarily means is that you end up just utilizing mostly rare items. And honestly, I really do like that rare items are like the end game pieces for your character, because this means you can specifically tailor items to your playstyle and the way that you enjoy the game. But I do think more general unique items that could be applied to many different builds could open up the game a little bit more and make finding uniques a little bit more fun. Because as it stands right now, most of the uniques I found, and from looking through the unique database online, it seems like most of them just wouldn't be useful to me in my specific situation. And from what I found watching people stream the game and people who have made videos on it, it seems to be the same thing for them as well. But back to the complexity we were talking about earlier, understanding items and crafting is actually very simple in this game. An item can only have a total of 4 affixes on it, 2 suffixes and 2 prefixes. Or say you find an item that has some affixes that really suit your build, but they might be low tier rolls. Well, this is where crafting comes in. In Last Epoch, you get what are called Affix Shards. And you mostly get these from just playing the game. They drop on the ground. You don't have to do anything special. You just find them as you're enjoying your time in Last Epoch. But if you are having trouble finding specific modifiers like flat fire damage on a weapon or something, you can pick up items that have flat fire damage on it and use what's called a rune of shattering on them. And it gets rid of all of the affixes on that item and gives you shards for them. So you actually have a way of target farming the affixes that you want for crafting if you need to do that. And actually crafting the items is super simple. So if you already have a rare item that has the affixes that you want, well, then you just put it in your forge and you can up the tier of those affixes with the affix shards that you have. Or if you really wanted to, you could start with a white based item and completely create it from scratch. But as you're creating these items, you're putting more instability on them. And the higher the instability goes, the higher the risk is that you can brick the item. You have ways of mitigating this instability and also reducing the chance that you brick the item. But as the instability climbs, the risk gets higher and higher. And honestly, I love this system. It just feels perfect. Like, it's intuitive. I don't feel like I have to spend my time on Google for 3 to 4 hours just to understand like the basics. And the risk, like I've had moments just just sitting in the room by myself playing the game where I'm just crafting things and the instability climbs and I'm just like jumping in my seat with excitement because it's not bricking the item and it's getting better and better. And while you're crafting an item, you actually have the chance of increasing the tier of another affix on your item at the same time. It's kind of rare when it happens, but when it does happen, it makes it that much more exciting. So through this crafting system, you can only upgrade an affix to tier 5. But Last Epoch also has items called exalted items, and these can drop with tier 6 affixes. Apparently they can also drop to T7 affixes, but I haven't seen that yet. So as far as end game goes, you would be trying to find these exalted items to craft with and build specifically for your character. I think it is worth mentioning though that you wouldn't need these items to make a good build. It's just kind of like the icing on the cake. And while we're still on the topic of items, let's move on to the item filter. Initially, I thought I wasn't going to be using this item filter much. I think Path of Exile has conditioned me to dread it. In PoE, I usually just pick some default loot filter and I run with that. I've tried to customize my loot filters in the past before, and to me, it's not fun at that point. I'm already spending like 3 hours in path building to make my character. I don't want to have to spend another 5 or 6 to make an item loot filter either. But when I finally did force myself to use Last Epoch's loot filter system, I was really surprised about how awesome it was. So to make this video and to make a lot of the videos that I do, I make bulleted lists of topics that I want to talk about. And when it came to the item filter, this is what I put down. The item filter is just super easy to use. It's really intuitive, and on top of that, it teaches you about item bases without forcing you to go to another website. I don't want to go into too much detail about the loot filter because that's something that you could obviously do on your own when you're playing the game, but I just really wanted to say how fucking awesome it is. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the end game. Currently, Last Epoch has 2 in-game systems in it. One is called the Arena, and the other are monoliths. I think arenas were their original in-game content, which is just never-ending waves of monsters pretty much, and you just try to push it to see how far you can go. It's very similar to Greater Rifts. And monoliths, I've seen a lot of people compare them to the mapping system in PoE. I've actually been really enjoying the monolith system. I like the fact that you have affixes that can be accompanied by the, I guess, quote-unquote maps that you go into, but they aren't overly saturated like the maps in Path of Exile. I personally find the affixes that are on maps in Path of Exile to be a little exhausting, especially when you're on hardcore and you're trying to fish for ones that aren't going to murder you. A lot of the times you end up just running blue maps to avoid the whole problem anyway. I think Last Epoch does a really good job of adding the affixes into the monolith system, but without them feeling like they are cumbersome. And if you're playing softcore, I think that the monolith system does a really good job of punishing you if you die. I've been playing softcore through my first playthrough, and I even find myself tense because I don't want to die in a monolith. Because when you die doing these monoliths, it regresses your progress. I don't want to go into crazy detail here about the way the monolith system works, but you basically have these timelines, and you go into these timelines through echoes. And as you progress throughout these echoes, you're working towards quest echoes. And as you progress through these quest echoes, you eventually unlock these things called blessings. And these blessings become like permanent upgrades for your character. And this whole system here, I find it to be just complex enough, which is not even, honestly, it's not even complex, but it's interesting enough to keep it fun. And the blessings are another way of just min-maxing your character. Now, I think there are a lot of people that might not find this to be enough in-game content, and for me, I could agree with that. But from what I understand, there's like 5 more in-game activities that the developers want people to participate in. They just haven't implemented them into the game yet. Also, another thing I want to mention about the echoes and the quest echoes and stuff like that is that they usually end up in a boss fight. So you progress through these echoes, much like maps in Path of Exile, and they lead up to a big boss fight. And these boss fights are actually pretty awesome. They're not like Path of Exile where you're getting one shot off screen, or I have to watch 3 or 4 videos to actually understand what the fuck is going on. You can just play the fucking game, see the mechanics coming at you, and dodge them when you need to. And this leads me into my next topic, which is my character's survivability. So as I said earlier, I've been playing a rogue, a bow-wielding rogue, and with that you would expect a squishier character, and that's definitely what I expected. My character doesn't have a very large health pool, my dodge chance isn't that great, and my armor is okay. But the way Last Epoch just works in general is that you dodge mechanics. Your ability to move out of the way seems to be way more important than the amount of survivability you have built into your character, and I love that. I love that I can run around as a dexterity-based character and not feel like a thin piece of paper. And so what's my final verdict on this game? I think it's fucking great. Currently, it's not online. There are plans for them to put the game online, and I think that once it is, it'll become a big ARPG that a lot of people start to play. I know for me that once this game goes online, it'll probably be the ARPG that I play the most. I just love the gameplay, the class design, crafting, and the complexity is just right. And also, they don't have straight up predatory monetization practices. I know it's a free game. Free games need to make money. But they don't need to charge $80 for a fucking helmet skin. Anyways, if you haven't played it, buy it and try it. I'm telling you, if you're an ARPG fan, you will not regret it. And if you've recently played Magic Legends, then you're definitely going to enjoy this a lot more than that. But thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. If you haven't already, make sure to check out my video on Magic Legends and how fucking awful it is. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more gaming related content.